so clean, it don't get no fresher. Chillin' in the freezer when I'm under pressure. I put it on ice. Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper, Dr. Pepper, Dr.
Confederate Colonel John Pemberton, who was wounded in the American Civil War and became addicted to morphine, began a quest to find a substitute for the problematic drug. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was the first significant law restricting immigration into the United States. This act provided a 10-year moratorium, which means a ban, on Chinese labor immigration.
Chinese immigrants began flooding into the United States in the 1850s, attracted by opportunities in the American West. They were escaping poverty and unrest in China and filling jobs in the new American mining and railroad industries.
And they were considered to be very pliable labor, very inexpensive labor, labor that would work no matter what the circumstances were, no matter how dangerous it was.
Within 30 years, about 200,000 Chinese had settled in the U.S. But by the 1870s, a backlash against them had grown large and violent.
They faced a lot of discrimination, a lot of racial intolerance because they were seen as working for lower wages, taking jobs at a time when unemployment was 25–30% in some communities. The Chinese become the scapegoat for American workers on the West Coast especially, for all the economic troubles.
The railroad companies turned against Chinese workers after they began to organize for better pay and a shorter workday. In 1867, when When 5,000 Chinese Central Pacific Railroad workers went on strike, the company simply cut off their food supplies until the starving workers agreed to return to work 1 week later.
And so there's the throw the Chinese out movement. Labor unions line up with it. The American Workingmen's Party is founded principally on this issue, and they pressure Congress, and Congress eventually agrees to pass its first immigration restriction law in 1882, explicitly targeting Chinese immigrants as undesirables.
The Chinese Exclusion Act banned Chinese laborers from immigrating to the United States for 10 years. It also prevented the Chinese already in the U.S. from becoming citizens. Congress renewed the law in 1892 and made it permanent in 1902. It was not until 1943 that the act was repealed, allowing Chinese immigration and granting citizenship to Chinese nationals already residing in the country. But by then, many once thriving Chinese communities in the U.S. had nearly disappeared.
The Dawes Act of 1887 authorized the government to divide Indian tribal land and give to individual Indians. Those who accepted allotments and lived separately from the tribe would be granted U.S. citizenship. This was designed to assimilate Native Americans into American society.
In 1887, well-meaning reformers had persuaded Congress to pass the Dawes Act. It provided for each head of an Indian family to be given 160 acres of farmland, or 320 of grazing land. Then, all the remaining tribal lands were to be declared surplus and opened up for whites. Tribal ownership and the tribes themselves were meant simply to disappear.
The Dawes Act was a way to break up the whole tribal structure of Native American nations. Instead of saying you are a group of people, all of a sudden you are individual landowners, you are Americans. And so it was designed to break up community, to civilize people, make us farmers, and to also break up our tribal structure.
Alice explained what she had called them together to hear, explained the land allotment, the meaning of citizenship, and her wish that the whole people would see the wisdom of the great change that she had come to bring upon them. Still a silence. The interpreter read the law and then sat down and waited. A little stir arose among the people, and at length one man stood up, tall, broad-shouldered fellow with an air of authority about him. He said, "We do not want our land cut up in little pieces. We have not told you to do it. We are content to be as we are." And a groan of assent ran along the dark line of sphinxes as the old man drew his blanket about him. "Our people are scattered," said another. "We must come together and decide whether we will have this law." She told them that there is nothing for them to decide. They have no choice. The law must be obeyed.
The Homestead Act of 1862 under President Lincoln gave 160 acres of land for free to settlers in the American West as long as they improved it, which means built on it, and lived on it for 5 years. In 1889, this happened.
In March of 1889, President Benjamin Harrison signed the Indian Appropriations Bill, which opened nearly 2 million acres of unassigned land to white settlement in the center of Indian Territory. For those interested, 160 acres of land was free for those who staked a claim. Participants had to be at least 21 years old and an American citizen. Their only cost was a $14 filing fee. Owners of the land would be determined in an unconventional way called a land run, which required settlers to race to a plot of land and stake a claim.
No wish to fight.
Protect us, Daniel! Here they come!
Stand by, partner, and pretend you're out of breath.
Pretend? My heart's up here in my nose.
My God, Nora! Oh, this is thrilling! Nora! No, Nora! No!
May 8, 1886, Chicago, Illinois. It began as a peaceful rally in support of workers striking for an 8-hour workday and a reaction to the killing of several workers the previous day by the police.